Hi everyone, it's Creatively Calm, coming to you again from my living room. Today we're going to continue reading Dragon Rider by Cornelia Funk. Today I will read chapters 5 and 6, and I hope that you continue to enjoy this story. Chapter 5. Gilbert the Ship's Rat. "Which warehouse is it?" asked Ben. "If you don't know the number, we could have a long search ahead of us." They were standing on a narrow bridge. Warehouses lined both sides of the canal. Strange, narrow buildings of red stone, with tall windows and pointed gables. The harbor of the big city wasn't far away, and a cold wind was blowing from that direction, almost tearing the hood away from Sorrel's pointy ears. A great many humans were pushing past them, but no one stopped and stared at the small figure with Ben, clutching the rail of the bridge. The sleeves of Ben's sweatshirt, which were much too long for her, hid Sorrel's paws. His jeans, turned up twice at the bottom, hid her legs, and her cat-like face was hidden in the shadow of the hood. "Rat said it's the last warehouse before the river," she whispered, "and her cousin lives in the cellar." "Rat? You don't mean a real rat, do you?" Ben looked at Sorrel doubtfully. "Of course she's real. What do you think? Don't just stand there looking stupid. Not that you don't do it well, but we've got more important things to do." She impatiently pulled Ben along after her. The bridge led to a narrow road running beside the bank. As they hurried along the pavement, Sorrel kept looking anxiously around. The sound of the traffic hurt her ears. She had been in small towns before, stealing fruit from gardens, exploring cellars, teasing dogs. But there were no gardens here, no bushes where you could crouch down and hide and hurry. Everything in the city was made of stone. Sorrel was greatly relieved when Ben guided her into a narrow alleyway that led back to the canal between the last two warehouses. There were several doors in the red walls. Two were closed, but when Ben pushed the third, it opened with a slight creak. They hurried in. An unlit stairway lay before them. Daylight filtered in through a narrow, dusty window, and revealed one flight of steps leading up and another down. Ben looked suspiciously down the dark steps. "There'll be rats there for sure," he whispered. "The question is, can we find the right one? How will we recognize it? Does it wear a collar or tie or something?" Sorrel did not answer. She pushed her hood and scurried down the steps. Ben followed her. It was so dark at the foot of the steps that he took the flashlight out of his jacket pocket. A cellar with a high-vaulted ceiling lay before them, and once again he saw a number of doors. "Huh?" Sorrel inspected the light and shook her head scornfully. "You humans need your little machines for everything, don't you? Even to look at." "It's not a machine," Ben swept the beam of the flashlight over the doors. "What are we actually looking for? A mouse hole?" "Don't be silly." Sorrel pricked up her ears and twitched her nose. Still sniffling, she moved slowly from door to door. "Ah, here we are." She stopped in front of the brown door that was slightly ajar. Sorrel pushed it open just far enough for her to slip through the crack. Ben followed. "My goodness," he murmured. The tall windowless room they entered was stuffed with junk up to the ceiling. Among shelves full of dusty folders stood stacks of old chairs, tables piled on top of one another, cupboards without doors, mountains of index card files, and empty drawers. Sorrel raised her nose, sniffing, then shot purposefully away. Ben banged his shin, following her. He had already lost track of the door they had come through. The farther they went, the more chaotic the clutter became. Suddenly, some shelving units barred their way. "That's it then, I suppose," said Ben, letting the gleam of his flashlight wander around the place. But Sorrel ducked, crawled through a gap between the two shelves, and disappeared. "Hey, wait for me!" Ben cried and pushed his head through the gap. He was peering at the small study, a study just the size for a rat, barely a meter away from him and underneath a chair. The desk was a book propped on two sardine cans. A coffee mug turned upside down did duty as a chair. There were index cards full of tiny slips of paper. Empty matchboxes stood everywhere, and the whole place was lit by an ordinary desk lamp standing on the floor beside the chair. but whomever it was who used the study was nowhere to be seen. "You stay here," Sorrel whispered to Ben. "I don't think the rat's cousin will be particularly pleased to see a human being." "Oh, come off it." Ben crawled through the gap and straightened up. "If it doesn't get a fright at the sight of you, it won't mind me either. Anyway, it's living in a human building. I don't suppose I'll be the first human it ever saw." "He," hissed Sorrel. "It's a he, and don't you forget it." She looked around curiously. In addition to the little study area under the chair, there was also a human-sized desk, a huge chest of drawers, and a large globe of the world hanging at an angle on its stand. "Hello," called Sorrel. "Anyone home?" "Oh, drat it. What was his name again? Gilbert? No. Godfrey? No. Gilbert Greytail, or some such." Something rustled above the desk. Ben and Sorrel looked up and saw a fat white rat looking down at them from his perch on top of a dusty lampshade. "What do you want?" asked the rat in shrill tones. "Your cousin sent me, Gilbert," said Sorrel. "Which one?" asked the rat wearily. "I've got hundreds of cousins." "Which one?" Sorrel scratched her head. "Well, we always just call her Rat." "Wait a moment, I remember. Her name's Rosa. That's it." "You've come from Rosa?" Gilbert Greytail let down the tiny rope ladder from the lampshade and quickly clambered down it. He landed on a big desk with a thump. "Oh, well, that's different." He stroked his whiskers, which were white as snow, like his coat. "What can I do for you?" "There's this place I'm looking for," Sorrel told him. "Well, it's a mountain range, really." "Ah," the white rat nodded, looking pleased with himself. "You've come to exactly the right person. I know all the mountain ranges on this planet, large, small, and medium. I know everything about them. After all, my informants come from all over the world." "Your informants?" asked Ben. "Yes, shiprats, seagulls, that sort of folk who get around a lot. And I have a large extended family." Greytail went over to a big black box standing on the desk, raised the lid, and pushed a knob on its side. "That's a real computer," said Ben, surprised. "Of course it is." Greytail hit a couple keys and looked at the screen, frowning. "A laptop, all the bells and whistles. I sent off for it to help me get my files into some kind of order, but the fact is," he sighed, and tried some more keys, "the fact is, it's always giving me grief." "Right, what mountain range was it you wanted?" Well," said Sorrel, scratching her stomach. She was itching horribly under the human's clothes. "It's supposed to be the highest one there is, the highest mountain range in the whole world, with a chain of mountains somewhere in the middle of it called the Rim of Heaven. Ever heard of it?" "Oh, that one, is it? The Rim of Heaven. Well, well." Greytail looked curiously at the brownie. "The valley above the clouds, home to the dragons. Not so easy." He turned around and hammered away busily at the keyboard. "The place isn't really thought to exist at all, you know," he said, "but one hears odd things now and then. What's your interest in it? A brownie girl and a human boy. They say even the dragons have long since forgotten where the Rim of Heaven lies." Ben opened his mouth, but Sorrel gave him no time to speak. The human has nothing to do with it," she said. "I'm on my way to find the Rim of Heaven with a dragon." "A dragon?" Gilbert Greytail looked at Sorrel in surprise. "Where have you hidden this dragon, then?" "In an old factory," Ben answered quickly before Sorrel could open her mouth. "Not far away. He'll be safe there. No one's been in it for years." "Aha!" Gilbert nodded his white head sagely. "Well, what about it?" asked Sorrel impatiently. "Do you know where the Rim of Heaven is? Can you tell us how to get there? Is it reasonably safe?" "One thing at a time," replied the rat, twirling his whiskers. "Nobody knows where the Rim of Heaven lies. There are a few vague rumors about it. That's all. But the highest mountain range in the world is in the Himalayas. No doubt of that. All the same, it won't be easy to find a safe route for a dragon to take. Dragons," he pointed out, chuckling, "aren't exactly inconspicuous. Know what I mean? And their horns and claws are in great demand. Quite apart from the fact anyone setting up as a dragon slayer could be a big star on TV for weeks. I'll admit I wouldn't mind taking a look at your friend myself, but," he said, shaking his head as he turned back to the computer, "but I never go farther than down the harbor. Far too risky for me with all those cats prowling about. And there are other dangers, too, he added, rolling his eyes. Oh, you wouldn't believe the half of it. Dogs, great big clumsy human feet, rat poison. No, thank you very much. But I thought you'd be all over the world, said Sorrel. Rosa said you're a ship rat. Gilbert tugged at his whiskers, looking embarrassed. Well, yes, so I am. Learned the trade from my granddad. But I get seasick as soon as the boat casts off, even a little rowboat. On my first voyage, I jumped overboard while we were still in harbor, swam back to the bank, and never set a paw on one of those swaying sardine cans again. Ah, he leaned so far forward that his sharp nose touched the screen. Here we are, the Himalayas. Also known as the land of the eternal snows, roof of the world and all that. You've a long journey ahead of you, friends. Follow me. Paw over paw, Gilbert Greytail made his way along a cord stretched right across the room, from the desk to the big globe. He sat on top of the heavy wooden stand and kicked the globe with his hind paws. Squealing, it moved slightly, and Gilbert brought it to rest on his paw again. Well now, he murmured. What have we here, then? Ben and Sorrel looked inquiringly at him. See that little white flag? Asked the white rat. It more or less marks the spot where we are now. But the Himalayas, said Gilbert, swinging himself over the stand and tapping the other side of the globe. The Himalayas are here, and the rim of heaven, so the old stories say, is somewhere in their western parts. Unfortunately, as I was telling you, no one knows any details, and the area we're talking about is unimaginably large and extremely inaccessible. It gets bitterly cold by night, and by day, he added, grinning at Sorrel, by day you'd probably be perspiring heavily in that fur coat of yours. Long way off, murmured Ben. Indeed it is, Gilbert Greytail leaned forward and traced an invisible line on the globe. By my reckoning, your journey ought to go something like this. A fair stretch south first, then turn east. He scratched his ear. Yes, that's it. I think the southern route is best. The humans are at war with one another again in the north, and I've heard some very nasty stories about a giant. Gilbert leaned so close to the globe that his nose was pressed against it. See that place? The giant is said to be at large there, in the Tin Shan Mountains. No, take my word for it, continues Gilbert Greytail, shaking his head. You'd better take the southern route. You may get your fur baked in the sun now and then, but look at the bright side. There probably won't be much rain at this time of year, and rain, he said, chuckling. I've heard that rain makes dragons melancholy. Is that right? Usually, replied Sorrel. But where we come from, they've had to get used to it. Correct, I'd forgotten. You're from the wettest part of Europe, aren't you? But let's get on with it. Gilbert gave the globe another little push. Where was I? Oh, yes. Up to here. He tapped the map with his paw. I can offer you first-class information. By the time you reach this spot, you ought to have most of the journey behind you. But the region beyond, Gilbert sighed and shook his head. Zilch. Zero. Nix. Not. Nothing. Total radio silence. Even a tourist party of Buddhist temple mice I met down by harbor last year couldn't tell me anything useful about it. And I'm afraid that's exactly where the place you're looking for lies, if it really exists. I'm planning to ask a relation of mine to survey the area sometime soon, but until then, he said, shrugging his shoulders regretfully, until then you'll just have to ask your way, if you get that far. I've no idea who or what lives around there. But I'll bet, he said, stroking his white whiskers, I'll bet there are rats. We rats go everywhere. That's a great comfort, I'm sure, muttered Sorrel, looking gloomily at the globe. Looks like there's a long haul flight ahead of us. Oh, it's even further to New Zealand, said Gilbert, swinging his paw over paw back along the cord to the desk. But I'll admit it's a long way even for a dragon. Long and dangerous. May I ask what put the idea of such a journey into your minds? I know from Rosa that dragons have quite a comfortable life up there in the north. Sorrel looked at Ben and cast the rat a warning glance. Oh, I see. Gilbert Greytail raised his paws. You'd rather not say in front of this human. Of course. We rats have had some bad experience with humans, too. Gilbert winked at Ben, who was standing there feeling embarrassed and not sure where to look. Nothing against you personally, understand, Greytail went back to his computer and began typing again. Right, here goes. Destination Himalayas. Travel party, 1 dragon, 1 brownie. Travel options. Calculate safest route, danger spots, places to avoid at all costs, best traveling time, enter. The rat stepped back, looking pleased with himself. The computer hummed like a captive bumblebee. The screen flickered and went black. "Oh no!" Gilbert Greytail jumped on the keyboard, hammering as it frantically, but the screen did not respond. Ben and Sorrel exchanged anxious glances. Gilbert leapt up, swearing, and slammed the lid of the laptop down over the keyboard. "Like I told you," he said crossly, "nothing but trouble. Just because a little salt water got into it, I mean, do you stop working if you happen to drink a sip of salt water?" Furiously, he jumped off the desk and onto the chair that sheltered his little study, slid down one of the chair legs, and began rummaging around in the matchbox index card files. Ben and Sorrel lay down on the floor and watched. "You mean you can't help us after all?" asked Sorrel. Yes, I can." Greytail was fishing tiny fingernail-sized cards out of the files and flinging them down on the desk. "If that stupid thing won't work, I'll just have to do it the old-fashioned way. Can one of you great big giants open the third drawer down in the chest of drawers there?" Ben nodded. When he opened the drawer, a large quantity of maps fell out. Maps large and small, maps old and new. It took Gilbert Greytail some time to find the one he was after. It looked odd, quite different from the maps Ben knew, more like a small book folded over and over again, with narrow white ribbons dangling from the pages. "A map?" said Sorrel, disappointed. When Gilbert proudly spread this oddity out in front of them. "You mean all you have for us is a map?" "Well, what did you expect?" Looking offended, the rat put his paws on his hips. Sorrel didn't know what to say. Tight-lipped, she stared down at the map. "Look at that, will you?" Gilbert passed his paw lovingly over the seas and mountains. "This map's got half of the world on it, and very few blank spots, only those places I couldn't discover anything about. But unfortunately, as I was saying, most of those do happen to be where you're going. See these ribbons?" He beckoned the two of them over and pulled out the ribbons. Part of the map immediately unfolded, and another map came into view. "Cool!" exclaimed Ben. But Sorrel just made a face. "What's that for?" "This method," said Gilbert proudly, twirling his whiskers, "is my own invention. By pulling the ribbons, you can see each part of the map again on a larger scale. Useful, don't you think?" Looking pleased with himself, he closed the map again and tucked his ear. "Now what else? Oh yes, just a moment." Gilbert took a little tray from his desk. On it stood 6 thimbles full of ink, each one a different color, a bird's feather with its quill sharp and laid beside them. "I'll write down the meaning of the different colors for you," said Gilbert portentously. "I expect you know the usual. Green for lowland country, brown for mountains, blue for water, and so on and so forth. Everyone knows that. But my maps tell you more. For instance, I'll use gold," he said, dipping the pen into the thimble of bright gold paint, "for my recommended flight path. And red," he added carefully, wiping the pen on the leg of the chair, dipping into the red ink, "to shade in places you ought to avoid because humans there are fighting one another. Yellow means I've heard strange stories about these parts, and misfortunes cling to them like a snail tail, if you take my meaning. Yes, and gray means this would be a good place to rest." Gilbert wiped the pen on his white fur and looked up at his 2 customers. "All clear?" "Yes," growled Sorrel, "all clear." "Excellent." Gilbert put a paw in his jacket pocket, brought out an ink pad and a tiny rubber stamp, and thumped it down on the bottom corner of the map as hard as he could. "There," he said, inspecting the mark left by the stamp closely before nodding satisfied. "Easily recognizable." He dabbed at the mark with his sleeve, folding the map up with care, and looked expectantly at Sorrel. "So now we come to the matter of my fee." "Fee?" said Sorrel, taken aback. "Rosa didn't say anything about a fee." Gilbert immediately put a protective paw down on the map. "Oh, didn't she? Typical. Well, customers have to pay me. How they pay is something I leave to them." "But I don't have anything," stammered Sorrel. "Only a few roots and mushrooms." "Huh! You can keep those," said Gilbert scornfully. "If that's all you've got, then the deal's off." Sorrel tightened her lips and rose. Gilbert Greytail came only to her knee. "I've got a good mind to shut you in one of your own drawers," hissed the brownie girl, leaning over him. "Since when do people ask to be paid for a little friendly help? You know something, if I wanted I could just snatch that map from under your fat little ratty bum. But I don't want to. We'll find our way to the Himalayas, or whatever they're called, without it. See? We'll... Just a minute, Ben interrupted. He pushed Sorrel aside and knelt down in front of the rat. Of course we'll pay, he said. It must have been an awful lot of work making that map. I should say so, squeaked Gilbert, still sounding affronted. His nose was quivering and his long white tail was agitated, tying itself in knots. Ben searched his pants pocket, took out 2 pieces of chewing gum, a ballpoint pen, 2 rubber bands, and a small coin, and laid them all on the floor in front of the rat. Which do you fancy? He asked. Gilbert Greytail licked his lips. A difficult choice, he said, examining everything very thoroughly. Finally, he pointed to the chewing gum. Ben pushed it over. Okay, now let's have the map. Gilbert removed his paw from the map, and Ben put it in Sorrel's backpack. Give me the ballpoint, too, squeaked the white rat, and I'll tell you something else that could be useful. Ben pushed the pen over to Gilbert and put the other things away. Go on, he said. Gilbert leaned lightly forward and whispered, You're not the only one who's looking for the rim of heaven. What? Gasped Sorrel, taken aback. Ravens have been turning up here for years. Gilbert went on, still in a whisper. Very peculiar ravens, if you ask me. They ask questions about the rim of heaven, but what they're really interested in is the dragons said to be hiding there. Naturally, I haven't told them anything about the dragons in my dear cousin Rosa's part of the world. Are you sure? Asked Sorrel suspiciously. Looking offended, Gilbert drew himself up to his full height. Of course I'm sure. What do you take me for? He wrinkled his nose. They offered me lots of gold and pretty precious stones, but I didn't care for those blackbirds. Ravens? Asked Ben. How come ravens? What have they got to do with dragons? Oh, they don't want the information for themselves, Gilbert Greytail's voice sank again. They're acting on behalf of someone else, but I haven't found out who yet. Whoever it is, your dragon had better be careful. Sorrel nodded. The golden one, she murmured. Gilbert and Ben looked at her curiously. What did you say? Asked the boy. Oh, nothing. She turned thoughtfully and headed for the gap between the shelves. Thanks, Gilbert, and goodbye, said Ben, following her. Give Rosa my love if you ever get back again. The rat called after them. Tell her to come and see me again sometime. There's a ferry quite close to your home, and they don't put rat poison down on it. Oh, yes? Sorrel turned back once again. And what will you give me to deliver your message? And then, without waiting for Gilbert's answer, she disappeared between the shelves. Okay. Chapter 6. Dragonfire. Well, we could have saved ourselves the trouble, said Sorrel crossly once they were out in the street again. We come to this stinking city purely to find that stuck-up rat, and what he gives us? Oh, stinking sticky bun fungus, a map, that's all. Scribbles on a bit of paper. Huh. I could have found that heavenly brim thing just by following my nose. She imitated Gilbert's voice. So now we come to the matter of my fee. I ought to have tried that silly fat podge to his globe with my own tail. Calm down, will you? Said Ben, pulling the hood up over Sorrel's ears before he led the way along the street. It's not a bad map. There are some things your nose won't tell you. You don't know anything about it, muttered Sorrel, plodding crossly after him. You humans use your noses for nothing but sneezing. For a while the two of them walked along in silence. Where are you going to set out again? Ben asked at last. As soon as it gets dark, replied Sorrel, almost colliding with a fat man whose dachshund was sniffing its way along the pavement. The dog raised his head in surprise when the scent of the brownie reached his nostrils, and tugged at his leash, yelping. Ben quickly drew Sorrel away into the nearest alleyway. Come on, he said. There's not much going on here anyway. We're nearly back. Stones everywhere, nothing but stones, Sorrel murmured uneasily at the walls of the buildings. My tummy's rumbling louder than those machines with their engines. I'll be glad to be out of here again. It must really be exciting to go on such a long journey, said Ben. Sorrel wrinkled her forehead. I'd rather have stayed in my cave, much rather. But just think of going to the Himalayas. It sounded so exciting to Ben that he started walking faster. And flying on a dragon's back. Oh, wow. He shook his head. I'd be bursting with happiness. It sounds like 1,000 adventures rolled into one. Sorrel gaped at the boy, shaking her head. Don't be so daft. What sort of adventures? It sounds to me like cold and hunger. It sounds like danger and fear. We were very well off at home, take my word for it. Rather too much rain, maybe, but what does that matter? You know something? It's all because you humans were going on this crazy journey. Because you won't leave us alone. Because we have to find somewhere your nasty furless noses will never come poking in. Oh, why do I bother telling you all this? You're one of them yourself. We're escaping from human beings, and here I'm hanging around with one. Now that really is crazy. Ben did not reply. Instead, he hastily shoved Sorrel into a dark doorway of a building. Hey, what's the big idea? She looked at the boy, irritated. Are you angry with me now, or what? We have to cross the street, right? The factory's on the other side. Exactly. Can't you see what's going on there? Whispered Ben. Sorrel peered over his shoulder. Humans, she breathed. Lots and lots of humans. And they've got machinery with them, too, she groaned. Speak of the devil, you stay here, Ben interrupted her. I'll cross the road and find out what's up. What? Sorrel shook her head vigorously. No, that's no good. I have to warn Firedrake at once. And before Ben could stop her, she was out in the street. She dodged between the honking cars and clambered over the low wall around the factory yard. Cursing, Ben ran after her. Luckily, there was so much else going on in the yard that no one noticed the two of them. A couple of men were standing beside a large bulldozer, talking to each other. Ben saw Sorrel hide behind the big scoop of the bulldozer to eavesdrop. Hastily he ran across and crouched down beside her. I can't make out what they're saying, Sorrel whispered. At least I can hear them all right, but I don't understand the words. They keep talking about blowing something up. What do they mean? Nothing good, Ben whispered back. Come on quick. He pulled Sorrel to her feet and ran toward the factory building. We must find Firedrake. We have to get him out of there somehow. Fast. Hey, you two, what are you up to? Someone called after them. They swiftly disappeared into the dark shelter of the tall building, but within seconds they heard footsteps following them down the stairs. Heavy footsteps. That's the way they went, someone called. Couple of kids it was. Darn it. How could a thing like this happen? Replied someone else. Ben and Sorrel ran through the empty, dilapidated factory basement. Their footsteps echoed down the long corridors, giving them away. But what else could they do? They had to warn Dragon before anyone discovered him. Suppose we're too late, gasped Sorrel, and she ran the hood, slipped off her pointy ears, and she quickly pulled it up again. Maybe they already found Firedrake. Maybe they've already gone and stuffed him, she sobbed. Nonsense, come on. Ben took her paw, and they ran on side by side. The footsteps behind them were coming closer and closer. Sorrel's legs were trembling, but it wasn't far now to Firedrake's hiding place. Then Ben stopped suddenly, gasping for breath. Wait a minute. Why didn't I think of it before? We must lead them away from Firedrake. You go on. Tell him to follow the canal to safety. The two of you must swim as far away from the factory as possible. The whole place is about to go up in smoke. What about you? Panted Sorrel. What will you do? I'll be okay, Ben managed to say. Go on, run. You must warn Firedrake. Sorrel hesitated for a split second, then turned and ran. The stairs were quite close now. She reached around the corner and into the room where she had found Ben. The dragon was lying asleep by the hatch. Firedrake! Sorrel jumped between his paws and shook him. Wake up! We've got to get out of here, quick! The dragon sleepily raised his head. What's the matter? Where's the human boy? I'll explain later, whispered Sorrel. Quick, through the hatch and into the canal. But Firedrake pricked up his ears. He rose and went slowly toward the corridor down which Sorrel had run. He heard human voices, two deep male voices, and Ben's as well. So what do you think they're doing here? Snapped one of the men. Looks like a runaway to me, said the other man. No, I'm not, cried Ben. Let me go. I haven't done anything, nothing at all. Looking anxious, the dragon stretched his neck further forward. Firedrake! Sorrel tugged desperately at his tail. Firedrake, come on. You have to get out of here. But the boy may need help, Firedrake. The dragon took another step. The men's voices grew harsher, and Ben's more uncertain. He's afraid, said Firedrake. He's a human, hissed Sorrel. And they're humans, too. They won't eat him. They won't stuff him either, but they'll stuff you and me if they catch us, and no mistake. So will you, for goodness sake, come on? But Firedrake wouldn't move. His tail was lashing the floor. Hey, watch out. He's trying to make a break for it, yelled one of the men. I'll get him, shouted the other. feet scuffling on the ground, and there was a sound of running footsteps. Firedrake inched a little farther forward. "Got him!" shouted the man. "Ouch!" cried Ben. Let go of me, you great toad!" Then Firedrake sprang like an enormous tiger. He shot across the cellar of the factory. Sora ran after him, cursing under her breath. The human voices grew louder and louder until the dragon suddenly saw two men standing with their backs to him. One of them was holding the struggling Ben. Firedrake uttered a low growl, deep and threatening. The men whipped around and dropped Ben to the floor like a sack of potatoes. He scrambled up in terror and ran toward Firedrake. "We're supposed to get out of here," he shouted. "Climb on," the dragon interrupted. Without taking his eyes off the two men, they were still standing there as if rooted to the spot. Ben, his legs trembling, clambered up on Firedrake's back. "Go away," the dragon commanded. "This boy is mine." His low voice echoed through the dark cellar. The men staggered and fell against each other in alarm. "I'm dreaming," one of them stammered. That's a dragon!" But still the pair of them didn't move. Then Firedrake opened his mouth, roared, and spat blue fire. His dragon fire licked over the dirty walls, the black ceiling, the stone floor, and filled the room with leaping flames. Terrified, the men retreated and ran away screaming, as if the devil himself were after them. "What's up? What's going on?" Out of breath, Sorrel caught up with Firedrake. "Quick, the canal!" cried Ben. "If they come back, they'll bring 20 more with them." "Go on, Sorrel," Firedrake said, listening uneasily to the fading echoes of the men's footsteps. When Sorrel was finally on his back, the dragon turned and strode toward their hiding place. Bright sunlight was still pouring through the open hatch. Cautiously, Firedrake put his nose outside. "It's too light," Sorrel moaned. "Much too light. What are we going to do?" "Come on!" Ben grabbed the brownie's hand and pulled her on the dragon's back with him as they clambered down. "Firedrake must swim alone. That way he can dive beneath the surface so they won't see him. We'll take my boat." "What?" Sorrel distrustfully finched away from the boy and pressed close to Firedrake's scales. "Must we really separate again? How will we find each other?" "There's a bridge," Ben turned to the dragon. "Swim down the canal on the left, and you can't miss it. Hide under there until we arrive." Ben looked at the boy thoughtfully. Finally he nodded. "Ben's right, Sorrel," he said. "Take care of yourselves, both of you." Then he forced his way through the hatch, dived deep into the murky water, and disappeared from sight. Sorrel anxiously watched him go, and without turning her head, she asked, "Where's this board of yours, then?" "Here." Ben went over to the stacked cartons and pulled them aside. A red-painted wooden boat came into view. "Call that a boat?" said Sorrel, horrified. "It's not much bigger than a toadstool." "If you don't like it, you can swim," said Ben. "Oh, drat it all!" Sorrel listened. She could hear agitated voices far away. Ben quickly crawled behind the stack of crates where he'd been hiding when they first met and came out again holding a large backpack. "Coming?" he asked, pushing his boat over the hatchway. We'll drown, that's what," Sorrel muttered, staring with disgust at the filthy water. But she helped the boy launch the boat into the canal. And that's Chapter 6. I look forward to seeing you next time for Chapters 7 and 8.